Steve Harvey was interviewing what he thought was a typical family, about budgeting tips. Then he found out they'd been sleeping in a parking lot for months. What happened next became the most generous moment in daytime television history. It was November 2018, and Steve Harvey was filming a special episode about families who make every dollar count. The producers had invited the Johnson family from Atlanta to share their money-saving strategies with the audience. On paper, they seemed perfect for the segment, a hard-working couple with 3 young children who had somehow managed to stretch their income to cover all their needs. What the producers didn't know when they booked the Johnsons was the full extent of their financial situation. What they didn't know was that this family had been living in their 2004 Honda Pilot for the past 8 months. James Johnson, 35, had worked as a construction foreman until a workplace injury damaged his back so severely that he couldn't return to physical labor. His wife, Maria, 32, had been working part-time at a grocery store, but her hours were cut when the store downsized. With 3 children, 12-year-old Sophia, 8-year-old Miguel, and 4-year-old Isabel, their small income wasn't enough to cover rent, food, and basic necessities. They'd lost their apartment in March, and despite applying for assistance, waiting lists were months long. Rather than split up the family or burden relatives who were already struggling, James and Maria made the heartbreaking decision to live in their car while they tried to get back on their feet. Every morning, James would drop the children off at school, then spend the day looking for work or at the library, updating his resume and applying for jobs online. Maria would go to her part-time shifts at the store. In the evenings, they'd park in different locations, sometimes behind a 24-hour Walmart, sometimes in a church parking lot where the pastor had given them permission to stay. The children knew their situation was temporary, but they didn't fully understand how dire things had become. Sophia, the oldest, helped keep her younger siblings entertained and positive, turning their car life into an adventure story. When Steve Harvey's producers found the Johnson family through a local community center, they were impressed by Maria's creative money-saving tips and James's positive attitude, despite their challenges. The family had submitted a video talking about how they made their small income work, but they'd been careful not to mention that they were homeless. "We make every dollar count by meal planning, using coupons, and finding free activities for the kids," Maria had said in their audition video. "We've learned that happiness doesn't come from how much money you have, but from being together as a family." The producers loved their story and invited them to appear on the show to share their budgeting wisdom with other families facing financial challenges. The Johnson family arrived at the studio that Tuesday morning, having spent the night in a hotel room, a rare luxury they'd splurged on, so they could shower and look presentable for television. They'd told the children this was a special trip to Chicago, to be on TV, and the kids were thrilled. Steve started the interview the way he always did, with warmth and humor, immediately putting the family at ease. "Now, Johnson family, I understand y'all have some amazing tips for stretching a dollar. In this economy, everybody needs to hear what you've got to say." James and Maria smiled, holding hands as they sat on the couch with their 3 children between them. "That's right, Steve," James said. "We've had to get really creative with our budget, and we've learned that you can still have a good life even when money is tight." "Tell me about some of these strategies," Steve said, genuinely interested. Maria started sharing their tips: buying generic brands, using the library for entertainment, finding free community events for the kids. The audience was nodding along, many of them clearly relating to the struggle of making ends meet. "And where do you all live?" Steve asked casually. "Atlanta, right?" There was a slight pause. James and Maria exchanged a quick glance. "Well," Maria said carefully, "we're currently between housing situations." Steve's expression shifted slightly. His interviewing instincts kicked in. "What do you mean, between housing situations?" Another pause. James cleared his throat. "We're staying with family right now," he said, which wasn't technically a lie. They were a family, and they were staying together. But Steve Harvey didn't become one of the most successful talk show hosts in America without learning how to read people. Something in James's tone, something in the way Maria's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, told him there was more to this story. "James," Steve said gently, "can I ask you to be completely honest with me? Where did you sleep last night?" The studio went quiet. The children looked confused. James and Maria looked at each other, and Steve could see them having an entire conversation without words. Finally, Maria's composure cracked. "We slept in a hotel," she said, her voice shaking. "But before that, we've been living in our car for 8 months." The audience gasped. Steve felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Your car?" Steve asked quietly. Maria nodded, tears starting to fall. "James got hurt at work and couldn't do construction anymore. I lost hours at my job. We tried everything, Steve. We applied for assistance. We looked for cheaper places. We sold everything we could sell. But we couldn't keep up with rent. So rather than split up the family," James added, his own voice breaking, "we decided to stay together and live in our Honda Pilot until we could get back on our feet." Steve looked at the three children, who were now starting to understand that their parents were talking about something serious. "Kids," Steve said softly, "how long have you been living in the car?" Sophia, the 12-year-old, spoke up. "Since March. But Mama and Papa said it's just until we find a new house. We pretend we're camping." Steve had to turn away from the camera for a moment to compose himself. When he turned back, there were tears in his eyes. "Maria, James, why didn't you tell our producers about this when you applied to be on the show?" "We were embarrassed," Maria said. "We didn't want people to think we were looking for charity. We just wanted to share that even when things are hard, you can still be a happy family." Steve stood up from his chair and walked over to the family. He knelt down in front of the children. "Sophia, Miguel, Isabella, I want you to know that your parents are heroes. Do you know why?" The children shook their heads. "Because they've kept your family together no matter what. They've made sure you still go to school, that you're safe, that you know you're loved. That takes incredible strength." He stood up and addressed James and Maria. "How long have you been looking for a place to live?" "Every day since March," James said. "But landlords want first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. We're talking about $3,000 to $4,000 up front. Every time we save a little money, something comes up. Car repairs, medicine for Isabella's asthma, school supplies." Steve nodded, understanding. He'd been poor himself. He knew how one unexpected expense could derail everything. "Well," Steve said, "I think it's time we help this family get back on their feet." He turned to face the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to share something with you. This family came here today to give advice to other families about saving money. Instead, they've taught all of us something much more important. They've shown us what real love and dedication look like." Steve walked back to his desk and picked up his phone. "I'm about to make some phone calls," he said. "Johnson family, I want you to know that your camping days are over." Over the next hour, Steve made a series of calls while the family waited backstage. He contacted local real estate agents in Atlanta, called his charitable foundation, and reached out to several sponsors of his show. When the family returned to the stage, Steve had a completely different energy. "Johnson family, I've got some news for you." "Steve, you really don't have to do anything," James started to say. "James, let me finish," Steve interrupted with a smile. "First, I found you a house in a good neighborhood in Atlanta. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, with a yard for the kids to play in." Maria gasped, covering her mouth. "Second, my foundation is going to pay for the first year's rent, all utilities, and all the deposits you need." The audience erupted in applause. James and Maria were both crying now. "But wait," Steve said, raising his hand. "I'm not done." He pulled out an envelope. "James, I know you've been looking for work but struggling because of your injury. I've spoken with a friend who owns a logistics company in Atlanta. They need someone with your experience to supervise their warehouse operations, no heavy lifting required. The job starts at $55,000 a year with full benefits." James stood up, overwhelmed. "Steve, I can't, this is too much." "And Maria," Steve continued, "I've also spoken with the manager at a Target near your new house. They have a full-time position available in their customer service department, with benefits and opportunities for advancement." Maria was sobbing now, unable to speak. "And kids," Steve said, turning to Sophia, Miguel, and Isabella, "I've got something for you too." He handed Sophia another envelope. "That's $5,000 for school supplies, clothes, and anything else you need to get settled in your new home." The audience was on their feet, cheering and crying. Even the camera crew was wiping their eyes. Steve walked over to the family and hugged each of them. "But the most important thing," Steve said, "is that you never gave up on each other. You stayed together, you kept believing, and you never lost hope. That's what real family looks like." 3 months later, the Johnson family returned to the Steve Harvey Show for a follow-up segment. They brought photos of their new house, where Sophia had her own room for the first time in months, where Miguel could ride his bike in the yard, and where Isabella could play with her toys spread out on the living room floor. James had excelled in his new position and had already received a raise. Maria loved her job at Target and was taking online classes toward a business degree. The children were thriving in their new schools. "Steve," Maria said during that follow-up appearance, "you didn't just give us a house, you gave us our dignity back. You showed us that good people still exist in this world." "And you reminded all of us," Steve replied, "that sometimes the people who have the least are the ones who have the most to teach us about what really matters." The Johnson family's story sparked a nationwide conversation about homelessness and the working poor. Steve's foundation received over $2 million in donations, specifically earmarked for helping families facing housing insecurity. But perhaps most importantly, their story reminded everyone watching that homelessness doesn't discriminate. It can happen to hard-working, loving families who simply hit a streak of bad luck. Today, the Johnson family owns their home in Atlanta. James was promoted to regional manager, and Maria graduated with her business degree and now manages her own Target location. Sophia is in high school and wants to become a social worker to help families like hers used to be. And every Thanksgiving, they send Steve Harvey a photo of their family dinner, not in a car or a hotel room, but around the dining room table of the home where love lives. If this incredible story of a family's resilience and the power of compassion moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles still happen when we look out for each other. Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness that changed your life? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the moments that restore our faith in humanity.